So next year will be my third year. So this lecture is going to be about hegemony and the new Cold War and the things associated with that. So we have first, what does hegemony mean in general? So the dictionary definition is that it's leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over others. We're going to be focusing on the countries and their hegemonic tendencies in this lecture, because that's most of what the debate's going to be about. So how does hegemony relate to debate on a basic level? So many of these debate topics concern power, the different power blocks of the world and the leadership hierarchy within alliances. And to put this in perspective of today's world, the US and Russia are both considered what we would call hegemons or hegemonic countries. So the global hegemony before the ascent of the US and Russia didn't really have a hegemon in a one clear hegemon. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was no clear global hegemon, just multiple great powers in Europe. This could be like Great Britain, France, and other European countries. World War I weakened Great Britain and paved the way for the US to step up as a global hegemon. And World War II created the United Nations, a power bloc, but also resulted in two hegemons, the US and Russia, with the US heading the United Nations and that Western power bloc, while the Soviet Union held the Eastern power bloc. And that led to what we would call the Cold War. So there was this time of dual hegemony between the United States and the Soviet Union before it dissolved. The Cold War, in its essence, was a battle of ideologies between both capitalism and communism, with the US heading the capitalist Western power bloc and the Soviet Union heading the Eastern power bloc dictated by communism. And both the US and the Soviet Union tried to stabilize their European, quote, like spheres of influence. Those spheres of influence were were stabilized by both the United States and by the Soviet Union, and that resulted in many different proxy wars as well as an arms race between the two countries. The arms race resulted in the United States and the Soviet Union both having numerous nuclear missiles and the development of nuclear armaments, while the proxy wars threatened to spill over into other regions. Proxy wars were fought by both the United States and Russia on different sides, both directly and indirectly. Whenever the United States was in a certain battle or war, you would know that the Russians were on the other side, the Soviets, because it was a battle of power and spheres of influence, not just that small war itself. After the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, it ceased being a hegemon for the time being and paved the way for the United States to take over. And the United States, for some time, was the sole hegemon until Russia came back into power. And the US already had a major role within NATO, but that increased and led to the United States having a big say in the United Nations Security Council, which is one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest international cooperation intergovernmental agencies in which they decide where to what to do and with different countries. So hegemony at present there's a certain debate on whether there are actually global in today's world. US, Russia, and China can all be considered global hegemons, but there's still a debate about whether that's actually true or not. Um, and so that's what, so different philosophers and different political scientists say that there's a three-way hegemony between the US, Russia, and China, but some say none of them are hegemons at all, and some say only or just one of them are global hegemons. The United States can be considered a global hegemon, but that's to be debated as well. So the U.S. hegemony has faced a lot of criticism over the years, and American political scientists like John Mearsheimer and then Joseph Nye believe that the United States is not a hegemon because it doesn't have the financial or military resources to back its and it doesn't have the financial or military resources or the global influence or its spheres of influence to be a true global hegemon. Other political scientists disagree with that and believe that the U.S. leadership is actually hegemonic governance because the United States leads NATO with its unilateral military action, and it's considered hegemonic within NATO. So therefore, it's hegemonic governance because NATO governs most of the world and is a powerful Western power bloc. So the United States is considered hegemonic within NATO because it's able to take unilateral military action without any repercussions from NATO because it is the leading power within NATO. So that's U.S. hegemony. Now we have Russia after it broke up, after the Soviet Union dissolved. So this is modern Russian hegemony. So Russia is considered a hegemon in today's world by some because of its military prowess and its geopolitical power and its military might, because it's able to back different countries in different wars against the United States, and it has the ability and financial resources to back wars and the ability to get arms in an arms race. So Russia is also one of two countries that has the ability to second strike, which is, so it has the ability to nuclear second strike, and the only other country to be able to do that is the United States. So that's why those two countries are hegemonic, and they have the resources and the nuclear resources especially to be able to govern the way the world works and the way the world runs. So Chinese hegemony, in 2006, a Chinese author believed that China was on its way to becoming a sole global hegemon, and he believed that the transfer from power from the United States to China was going to happen within that next 10 years. But most political scientists now believe that China will become a global hegemon, just one of three on the globe, including the US, Russia, and China. Because whatever China has in financial and military power, the United States has that military power to back itself too. So there's not a transfer of hegemonic power. So those three, the United States, Russia, and China, are all considered hegemonic powers in today's world. So that's just an overview from hegemony from the 19th centuries up to what hegemony looks like now. So does anyone have any questions about what hegemony looks like or what hegemony is in general? You can write your questions in the chat, or you could just unmute. Okay, no one has any questions? Okay, so now we'll move on to what we would consider the new Cold War. So the new Cold War refers to the post-Cold War era of political or military tension between opposing geopolitical blocks. So the old Cold War was a power battle between the Western power bloc and the Eastern power bloc. Now the geopolitical power blocks are not really Western or Eastern, but they're intermingled. So one of the blocks is going to be led by Russia or China, and the other power bloc is led by the US or NATO. Yeah, that's right. Hegemons are the top global power. Hegemony is the act of countries or the leadership of countries in the globe. Okay, so in the new Cold War, one of the blocks is going to be led by either Russia or China, and the other power block is led by the United States or NATO, because when the United States goes into a war, usually NATO follows, and the US is backed by NATO, or NATO is backed by the United States, usually one of the two. So there have been a lot of past usage of the phrase New Cold War. Different academians have used the phrase to refer to the time periods either 1979 to 1985 or the 1985 to 1991 parts of the old Cold. So the beginning of the new Cold War was also used to describe the U.S. Senate vote to expand NATO to include more Eastern European countries like Poland. Um, this is true. This made people fear that this would make the Soviet Union and Russia mad, because more Eastern countries would be leaving the Eastern power bloc and moving to NATO and the Western power bloc, and the Russians would lose their sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. And the last past usage of the phrase, the new Cold War, was when a journalist claimed that the Kremlin was a menace to both the West and Russia, and it could stoke a new Cold War. He considered the Kremlin as the catalyst to the new Cold War in general. So tensions between the US and China have been pretty high recently due to the Trump administration. So the White House under Trump views China as a threat, and the Trump administration shifted the US view of its competitors from Russia to China as its main competitor. So the trade war in recent years between the Trump administration and China have increased tensions between the two countries. And many political scientists believe that if Trump doesn't resolve tensions, a new Cold War might break out between the two countries, a Sino-American Cold War. So the trade war in 2018, the US imposed 4 rounds of tariffs on Chinese products, and the Chinese responded with their own set of tariffs on American products. So deals have been made between the two countries, and there's hope that there's not much cause for hope for an end to the trade war, because none of these deals have actually come to fruition with the Trump administration and their efforts to continue placing tariffs on Chinese products. So here's a chart on how the U.S.-China trade war has escalated. That's from July 2018. And so from July 2018 to June 2019, the tariffs have escalated, especially on the U.S. side, starting from 34 billion all the way up to 200 billion in under a year. So in total, close to 450 billion on the U.S. side. And then on the Chinese side, almost 200 billion. So that's a lot of products and economic toll that has been taken on both countries, more so on the United States, as you'll see in the next chart, and that has caused tensions to rise even more. So the U.S.-China trade war tariffs. This is the percentage of U.S. tariffs on Chinese exports. It's gone up in both countries pretty drastically, almost 20% in each country. So there's thoughts that this might lead to a new Cold War because of all of this tension. The trade gap, as you can see, shows that the United States exports to China versus imports to China. The United States is getting hurt more than China is in this matter because the imports from China are way bigger than the exports to China. So the tariffs we create actually hurt us more. Okay, so that's the trade war situation. And so how does the trade war affect relations in general? So the trade war could lead to the United States and China indirectly fighting proxy wars directly or indirectly. And that could lead the United States to lose imports from China, which you saw in the last graph is really high. And that would weaken the United States' economy. And so proxy wars are not good because of the amount of resources the United States would have to put in to those wars. And that war could escalate into a bigger nuclear war or just a global war in general. But every global war from now on would likely include nuclear weapons. The United States could lose their imports from China, and they get cheaper products from China. So the expense that we would have to, the amount of money we would have to pay to get those same products from U.S. factories would be a big change. So what's so bad about proxy wars? So proxy wars are fought with superpowers like the United States and Russia and China backing their weaker allies. So if things get out of hand in a proxy war, more allies start piling in, and then you have a global war taking place. And those global wars at present would include nuclear weapons, which would lay waste to many countries and possibly the earth. So these nuclear weapons can both be used by the United States and Russia, and now China too. And these, so yeah, proxy wars that happened. I'll get to them. I have a couple slides on those. So so basically, these proxy wars could lead to greater causes of these proxy wars could draw in greater superpowers and could lead to unforeseen effects. So the tensions between the United States and Russia, they reached a high during the Obama administration when they tried to administer a Russian reset. However, there are some differences between the first Cold War and the quote new Cold War that is happening at present. So Russia is now tied down by its economic ties around the world. It didn't used to be, but now it is. And those economic ties around the world are not letting it fight in different wars that it would have before. So the United States and Russia have had a lot of proxy wars. They're almost involved in every modern proxy war we've seen, but they're always on opposite sides. The United States has been part of almost 20 proxy wars since 1960. Some of them big, some of them not so big, but they all have an effect on the United States. And Russia was almost always supporting the opposing side, and that causes a big rift in relations between the two countries. Most of the time, the U.S. and Russia are supporting indirectly, but sometimes they get into the wars directly. So an example uh, of the Iran-Saudi Arabia. So an example of the Saudi Arabia proxy conflict. An example of a proxy war would be the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict, which is also known as the Middle East Cold War. It's been going on since 1972, and it's basically a conflict of power and influence in the Middle East between the countries of Saudi Arabia and Iran. The United States back Saudi Arabia, while Russia and nowadays in recent history, China has also started backing the country of Iran. Both of those two powers are trying to get regional hegemony, and the United States, by backing Saudi Arabia, would get regional hegemony if they win, and uh, Russia and China would get regional hegemony if Iran wins. So this is both a political and an economic struggle between the two leading powers of the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia. But the conflict itself has been exacerbated by the religious differences between the two countries. Saudi Arabia is largely Sunni Muslim, while Iran is largely Shia Muslim, and they both view themselves as leading countries in their respective religions. So it's not only a political and economic struggle nowadays, it's more of a religious struggle between the people of the two countries. So these conflicts, like the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict, commonly spill over into other regions of the Middle East, like Syria and Lebanon, and cause things like the Syrian civil war. These two countries and their allies fund different militant groups in other countries to gain power over different regions, like Iran backing the Hezbollah militant group in Lebanon, because the Hezbollah group in Lebanon has a lot of power within the government of Lebanon. Another example of a proxy conflict is the Syrian civil war. It's a war between the government of Syria, led by their president Bashar al-Assad, and various other opposing domestic, as well as other foreign forces who don't like the way Bashar al-Assad is treating his citizens and the way he's running the country. The government of Syria is backed by Russia, while the United States backs the Syrian opposition, and it's also backed by NATO. The Syrian civil war has no end in sight as of present. Many civilians in Syria have been killed or have lost their homes. Millions have been suffering. And this war is not just about Syria and their civilians at this point. It's more about clashing ideologies with the United States versus Russia and China. But it's affecting the people in Syria. And peace talks have been taking place, but as of now, there hasn't been much fruition. In some areas, fighting has stopped, but there's still a long way to go to end the war. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about the proxy conflicts or the new Cold War in general? Okay, so what I mean by regional hegemony is leadership in a certain region, right? So the Middle East is a big region in which we consider some countries regional hegemons. And right now, there's dual hegemony between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And those two countries together, they form they're two hegemons in the region. And one of them wants to take over and become the sole hegemon and increase its influence in the region. So basically, a regional hegemony is a leadership by one country or multiple countries in that one region, not the whole globe. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, I guess not. So then I'm going to move to a link chain exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a link chain that ends with an impact of nuclear war. You can use information from this lecture, but you don't need to. You're going to take 4 minutes. So I'm just going to set a timer for 4 minutes for you to come up with a link chain that would end with an impact of nuclear war. Honestly, so you don't need to share your link chain. I just want you to be able to do the exercise and come up with a certain a certain link chain. But if you want to share, you can. So I'm going to time for 4 minutes, and then I want to see what you come up with. Everyone knows what a link chain is, correct? Okay. All right, I can explain that then. So a link chain is just a series of events that are linked together. So for example, a link chain starts with a certain event and can end with an impact. So I would start with, let's say, the U.S.-China trade war. The United States-China, and I want to end with an impact of nuclear war. So I would say the United States-China trade war could lead to proxy conflicts with the United States backing uh, India in the Kashmir conflict, and then China backing Pakistan in the Kashmir conflict, and then the two countries fight it out, and they have and that draws in more powers with NATO coming in to back the United States, and then the United States and India, and then let's say Russia comes in to back China in the conflict, and then that leads to an all-out nuclear war, and that impact of nuclear war would be the end of my link chain. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna set a timer for 4 minutes, starting now, and you have 4 minutes to come up with a link chain. Again, you don't need to share it. I just want to see that you're trying to come up with one. But if you'd like to share it, that'd be great.